Once again, faculty and coach Vivek Burda is with you to take further topics of the business environment. So moving ahead, the next topic over here is approaches to the environmental scanning. See, the environmental scanning, as we have discussed, environmental scanning can be done in a variety of ways, for spontaneous crisis reaction measures to the spot or to the ad hoc research. And being on a proactive side, this prospective changes in the factors can be consistently anticipated through the employment of the higher formalized and the methodological process. And when we talk about the approaches, the environmental scanning can be done using three approaches. The first is systematic approach, the second is ad hoc approach, and the third is process form approach. What is the systematic approach? Systematic approach is nothing but it is systematic approach comprises of creation and implementation of all encompassing statements or systems which are targeted at the continuous and the specific collection of the data for environmental scanning. This is the ongoing gathering of pertinent data on the range of the environmental elements that affect the industry and the businesses of the organization. Thus, the information about consumers, market, modifications of the laws, rules, regulations, or everything which are being updated on time to time and on regular basis is part of the systematic scanning or systematic approach. Thus, this type of scanning guarantees that the efficient implementation of operational tasks as well as successful strategic management in the organization. The second approach is ad hoc approach. Ad hoc approach represents the strategy which involves the continuous conducting the ad hoc surveys and the research on the regular basis to address certain environmental challenges. And every time a new strategy needs to be developed or existing one needs to be evaluated, the organization takes on the specific scanning initiatives. The third over here represents the process form approach. The process form approach is basically in which the strategy makes use of the information that has been processed and gathered from the variety of internal and external sources, usually government agencies or the corporation organization with expertise in gathering and processing this kind of data and are the sources of this kind of processed information. Now the organization utilizes a variety of methods or the mix of methods to keep an eye on the pretend environment when developing strategies which necessitates the environmental scanning. Thus, the situation may be dictate when course of action to be taken. Data collection is necessary to obtain information on the environmental parameters regardless of strategies used for the environmental scan. Now, next over here is the basic process of the environmental scanning. How the scanning is done. As we mentioned, scanning is nothing but it is basically analyzing the things carefully and analyzing those things which may directly or indirectly impact the organization. Thus, this basic process of environmental scanning includes scanning, monitoring, forecasting, assessment. Now, the scanning represents the process of analyzing the environment to spot the factors that may impact the business and is called as an environmental scanning. It alerts the expertise to take the suitable strategic decisions before it reaches a critical situation. Now, when we talk about the monitoring represents the data which is being gathered from the various sources is to be utilized to monitor and find out the trends and patterns in the environment. Now, this monitoring of the data, the main sources of collecting the data is either by spying or through the publication logs, either with the customers or with the suppliers, with the dealers or with the employees. Next step includes forecasting. In the forecasting, we basically speculate the things. It is a process of estimating the future events based on the previously analyzed and gathered data, which is known as environmental forecasting. And the next includes assessment. In this stage, the environmental factors are assessed to identify whether they provide an opportunity for the business or they pose a threat for the organization. Now, the detailed process of environmental scanning is discussed over here. When we talk about the detailed process of environmental scanning can be studied using four approaches. The first approach is identification of the key environmental variables. The second is identification of the resources of the information for the environmental scanning. Third is identification of key environmental variables. And the fourth is identification of the sources of information for the environmental scanning. So the first is identification of the key environmental variables. See, finding an important environmental variable that affect the company's operations and the sector is the first stage of environmental scanning. First, we need to identify what are those factors, what are those elements which are impacting my organization. So the first step of the scanning process is to identify all those things, all those variables which are impacting the company's operations and which are important in the sector. This is the first step and first stage of environmental scanning process. These factors can be either in the macro and macro environment or macro and macro elements of the business environment. And both these factors pertain more generic characteristics and will be identified by the organisms. Thus, the important factors which include pertaining to the customers, the market or the competition, the technology, the regulatory framework, and so forth. The second over here represents identification of the sources information for the environmental scanning, in which we are finding out the information sources for the environmental scanning. And the information for the environmental scanning must be gathered from variety of sources, including officials and the informal ones. The resources offer both vocal and textual information. Both internal and external domains may serve as data source. Among the key categories of the information sources, the third over here represents information of the key environmental variables. The information of the key environmental variables includes finding the important environmental variables that affect the company's operation in the sector in the first stage of environmental scanning process. Thus, the macro and the macro elements of the business environments are included in these factors. Both pretend and more generic characteristics must be identified by the organizations. Important environmental factors may be included, which are pertaining to the customers, market, or the competition, technology, and the regulatory framework, and so forth. Next includes the identification of the sources of the information for the environmental scanning, in which we focus on finding out all those sources which can be gathered from a variety of sources or from the officials or even from the informal ones. In this, the resources offer both vocal and textual informations, and both internal and external domain may serve as a data source. Among the key categories of the information, thus the internal sources, it can be either through the corporate reports, it can be through papers, database, procedures produced by the management information systems, and employee contributions. The secondary information source include trade and industry organization, newsletters, government publications, newspapers, journals, magazines, annual reports of the company, and many more things. Many more things. So this is something which you need to understand very carefully. Now next over here in this part, we'll be discussing very importantly and carefully, we'll be discussing about various techniques of environmental scanning. See, environmental scanning involves various techniques which are required to gather and analyze the information about the external environment of the organization. And these techniques collectively assess the organization in order to comprehensively assess their external environment. Comprehensively assess their external environment. So when I talk about these things, it includes identifying the key trends, challenges, opportunities, formulating the strategies, and many more things. And many more things over there. Thus, each technique, there are total six techniques which we're discussing. First is SWOT analysis, second is PAST analysis, third is ETOP analysis, fourth is QUEST analysis, the next is pattern analysis, and the last is industry analysis. Each technique offers a unique perspective and set of insights that contribute to the informed decision making and strategic plan. So now studying out individually each technique carefully with their small details over there. The first technique is called as the SWOT analysis. SWOT is a combination of 4 words. S represents strength, W weakness, O opportunity, and T threats. SWOT analysis is basically is a tool which is a strategic tool which can be applied to each and everything in the each and everything. It can be applied to the individual, as a person, to the company, to the organization, to the product, even to the government, everything. The strength and weakness are the internal factors, and opportunities and threats are the external factors. SWOT analysis helps to identify the strategic factors for planning and decision making. And these factors determine the course of actions to ensure that the growth of the business goes ahead. Now, this SWOT analysis in this has been strength represents the internal capabilities and the resources which are given, which give the organization an advantage. Whereas weakness represents the internal limitations that place the organization at a disadvantage. Opportunities represents the external chances to improve the performance. Threats represent the external element that cause trouble to the organizations. Now, next image represents the SWOT analysis for any organization when they scan the business environment, then when they do the environmental scanning for the business environment. In this, for example, at the S strength, the companies focus on all those things in which the organization is doing very well. They focus on their key resources in the form of man, money, machine. They even focus on their core capabilities, which are their strength, on which they had command, through which they can engage the market. And they also create all those qualities which make them unique from their competitors or their USP, everything. But and so strength is a positive scenario. W represents the weakness. The weakness is a negative scenario. In the weakness, we focus on all those things which in which the organization lacks, or what are those things which are limited to the organization in the form of resources, in the form of men, money, machine, finances, resources, or any licensing, suppliers, vendors, competition, market, consumers, anything, whatever is which they are lacking. Next, also they focus on the qualities where the things are doing over there.